what's Scott call them? The remnant, the disobedient. I mean the. I didn't know it'd be my wife. I get to. Where's Cannon at? No, he don't need to be. Hey, L.A., tell Cannon to come in here. Watching the baby. She'll be all right. All right, Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 8. Now remember, King Nebuchadnezzar, last week we talked where he's commanded everyone in all of Babylon to come to this golden image that he's had made. He wants to have this big ceremony, and he wants everybody, when they blow the trumpet and the tuba and the salt and all these different instruments, they're going to blow these instruments and make all this noise, this music. And as soon as they blow their instruments, they're all supposed to bow down. And the king has told them, every single one of them, to bow down. And I taught you last week, this is a sign of what we're seeing in forced obedience versus what do we see to accept you. You have to do something and to be right with God. That by follow some kind of law or keep some kind of a command. You have to do something. That's legalism in the simplest, most definition. We're not saved by keeping the law, are we? Or doing good deeds. We're saved by what? By grace. And I often tell people this. Your good will never outweigh your bad. Never. You can be good. You think you're so good, but all God sees is bad. And Isaiah calls it filthy rags, right? The best you can be. Sister Teresa, the sweetest, most beautiful person we've ever even heard of. To God, it's a wretched, filthy rag sinner. Bad. That's all God sees. Then Christ comes on the scene. And He's what? He's good. So the imputed righteousness of Christ is put on us, and God sees us now as good. Now, you and I are like, wow, I don't feel very good. I don't feel deserving of that. You know, it humbles us, doesn't it? So that's what legalism is, and I wanted to bring that out. I know even though we're talking about this forced obedience, but that's what you see in a lot of false religions. And unfortunately, you'll hear it from Christians, and you'll see it in even, Protestant denominations. You'll see, and we always guard against that in the church, guys. We don't want to become police of people. We don't want to, come in here and we're examining everybody, see what everybody's doing. Make sure everybody's doing everything. That's not what we're here for. We're here to encourage one another, to edify one another, to build one another up. Now, there are instructions about when your brother's in sin, you go to them privately and these kind of things. But we're not here to force obedience. That's what Nebuchadnezzar did. Now, what did Nebuchadnezzar tell them was going to happen if they didn't bow down? He said he was going to throw them into a fiery furnace to be burned alive. Well, you're talking about extreme punishment, huh? You don't bow down to his golden image, we're going to burn you to death in a fiery furnace. Can you imagine that? Emily, can you imagine if I said, Emily, if you don't come to Bible study on Wednesday night, we're going to burn you to death? No way. But that's how mean this guy was. That he was willing to burn people alive because they wouldn't bow down to his fake God. So that's where we're at. Now let's see what happens tonight. Verse 8. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. Now, you remember who the Chaldeans were, right? These were the ones, the priests, the wise men in Babylon's, in Nebuchadnezzar's top guys that's around the throne, right? These are the ones giving him counsel. They're the astrologers from the east. And, I mentioned to you that the wise men come from this area later when Jesus is born. But these were the wisest men on the planet. Okay? But they could not interpret the king's dream. They couldn't tell the king what his dream was. And let me take you back and give you a little insight to where, because we need to get in the mind of these Chaldeans and what they're doing here, what's happening. In verse 10, back in chapter 2, and Josh will put it up there. I think he will. Yeah. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king. King, there ain't nobody on this planet can tell you what you dreamed. Jeff, can you tell me what I dreamed last night? It ain't possible. No human can tell you what you dreamed. Now, you may have a dream, and if you have a dream, you go to Dana Gwynn, and she'll tell you what your dream means. That's a joke. That is a joke. And for all of you that don't message me tomorrow, no, she cannot interpret dreams. Somebody will message me. I'm going to say it again. That was a joke. It's okay to joke in church. Now, somebody's going to quote Ephesians 6, right? No, coarse gesturing. I'm sorry. Well, he says here, there's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. All right? Now, interesting point about these Chaldeans. After Daniel interpreted the dream, do y'all remember what the king said he was going to do to them if they couldn't interpret his dream? He said he was going to destroy them and put a dung and outhouse over the top of their whole family. Tear their house down, kill all their family, and put a outhouse over the top of it. That's how mean this guy is. Well, Daniel comes in and interprets a dream, but we didn't hear anything from the Chaldeans, did we? Did we see them running up to Daniel, hugging him? Thank you, Daniel, for saving our life. We didn't hear anything. What did they do? They just kind of drifted away into the shadows for all these years, and we don't know the time. The Bible doesn't give us a timeline of how long it took from the interpretation of the dream to when he builds this golden image. But it's been many years, okay? More than 10 years, most theologians think. So it's been a while. We haven't heard anything from these Chaldeans. Nebuchadnezzar's using Daniel and his three counterparts there, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to help him run the province we saw last week of Babylon, all the area of Babylon. So all of a sudden now we got these Jewish slaves, and now they're leading Babylon. And he kicked out his wise men. Now, if you're the wise men and you're sitting by the king's throne every day, and all of a sudden you get the boot, are you going to be buddy-buddy with the... You'd be some jealousy, right? Be some envy and some jealousy and contempt, some contempt going on here. Well, what charges? It says here that they came forward and brought charges against the Jews. So what charges do they bring? Look at verse 9. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. Now you gotta play the game. This is just pomp and circumstance here. O king, live forever. We want you to live forever. We worship you. Look at us, king, how much we love you. All this is fake. It's just fake. These astrologers, these priests, these wise men, they had the great little system going, didn't they? We fast forward, I can also see this not just in pagan cultures, but also look what the Pharisees became. They became so obsessed with their system that right off the bat we see they're going to let a little widow woman go and die. They don't care. Jesus comes, their Messiah comes, healing people, doing all this stuff, but they pick up stones to what? To kill him. Why? Because he wasn't going to give them the system that they wanted. See, this is the natural man. This is the way they think. And so they said, O king, live forever. And then look at verse 10. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. So they come in here to the king, and they're going to remind him, first of all, O king, you've made this decree. They're going to tell the king what his law is, okay? Notice one of the key things here in this little is they remind him that every man, king, O king, you've made a decree that every man who hears the sound, not just Babylonian, Chaldean people. When he says every man, see, they coached him into this. Every man means what? Every man. The Jews too. Okay? Now, these Chaldeans, these wise men, have been watching Daniel. They've been dealing with Daniel and these others. They think there was probably 70-something of these young Jewish boys that they brought in. There's no biblical proof of that. It's just an educated guess. But they've been training these boys for 3 years in Chaldean ways, which means what? They've been learning about their ways. So they know, like I read to y'all this last week, and I'm going to say it again because this is a passage. And look on the screen at Exodus 20. Did I give you these, Josh? Exodus 20? Yeah. And the reason I want to read it again this week, because how often do y'all go back and read the Ten Commandments? I mean, it hit my mind. It's been a while since I've read the Ten Commandments. And I thought, well, I'm just going to bring it to the church 2 or 3 times in a row here to refresh our minds what God said. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, we're hearing these 4,000 years, 3,000, whatever years after the fact, and we're like, duh, Derek, we know that. But I want you to internalize this as you hear it. You shall have no other gods before me. If God examines you tonight, He set you down in front of you and said, do you think He's going to show some idols in your life? Do you think He's going to reveal where you've been putting other things before Him? I think we're all kind of like, we're guilty. He said, you shall, in verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the 3rd and the 4th generations of those who hate me. Something we forget often there. You know who worships other idols, worships other gods? What does He say? You hate me, of those who hate me. It's interesting what Jesus, being God later, you know, when I say this often, you're either with me or what? Against me. When we look at people who are cast into hell, they're gnashing their teeth. There's an anger. There's not people are not in hell. Please, God, let me out of here. I'm sorry. I'll do better this time. They're in hell, gnashing their teeth in anger, in a hatred toward a God who wants to restrain their sin. That's the truth of what the Scripture teaches. He says in verse 6, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. Who does He show loving kindness to? To those who love me and keep my commandments. Jesus said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. This is the very first commandment. No other gods. Don't you know that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had that driven into them from the time they were little? So the first thing we see when they come into Babylon, and the king says, hey, here, boys, eat some steak, eat some everything. You can eat anything now. Don't worry about what your God said. You can drink the choice wines. You can eat all of this stuff. And Daniel said, no. And I keep stressing this. Daniel's parents weren't there. His priests weren't there. He had nobody, no accountability whatsoever. He could have said, all right, give me the steak, give me whatever. But Daniel said, no, I will not defile myself with the king's foods. And the king, we saw how God protected him there. The king backed down. Now, back to Nebuchadnezzar. We know what Nebuchadnezzar's already seen. He's already seen this miracle that this young man, this 20-year-old kid, told him what his dream was, and then told him what it meant, which is another miracle, because he's telling us how the end of the world's going to come. He's telling us the future. And we can clearly see in this Bible that we know exactly what's going to happen. Now, we don't know exactly to the day, but we know what's going to happen. Right? Because Daniel tells us. God tells us through Daniel, and the next event that we're waiting for is what? What's it called? One of the young people. What's the next event we're waiting to happen? Starts with an R. Rapture. That's going to happen. And I'll be honest with you, I like to say it. You're sitting here in this room tonight. What will happen if you're not a born-again Christian is every Christian in this room is going to disappear. Does that sound like something off a movie, Brady? Sounds like somebody'd make it up, right? Until I come along and say, hey, there's 320 prophecies in this book that came true. So when God says that's going to happen, do you doubt it? So there's going to be people in this room that are going to... Now, I don't know this if you're listening out there. I don't know if we just, the Bible calls it, it's snatching away. It's that, I can't quote the Greek word for you right now, but it means it's to be snatched away. That's the way it's described. So I don't know if we just disappear or if we ascend like Jesus did in front of those witnesses that day. So I don't know. You can speculate whatever you want to on that. I'd kind of like to think that we go up slowly like Jesus did. You know, I'd kind of like to think that those that we know that have gone before us, that the dead in Christ are going to rise first. Wouldn't that be neat to see those loved ones that we have? Hey, we're going up together. Now they get to go ahead of us, but I'll be catching them because, you know, I'm going to be flying. Anyway, I'm just keeping y'all awake. But after all that Nebuchadnezzar had seen, this dream being interpreted, look where his mind quickly went to. It's like he just forgot it. Okay? Let me remind you what the king said after the dream. Verse 47 of chapter 2. Look on the screen. The king answered Daniel and said, "Surely your God is a God of gods." Isn't that something? Surely your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. Nebuchadnezzar, you know who the true God is. Why would you have these people bow down to your fake gods? He didn't get it, did he? Now look at verse 12. These Chaldeans said, "There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon." And I'm using my lawyer voice because I think that makes the emphasis better. Can't you just hear them? "There's certain Jews, O king, who you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon." You did that, king. You put those Jews over here. Namely, and we already know who they are, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. And I got a feeling they were being very dramatic in their presentation to this king. "Oh, they've disregarded you, king." Can't you just hear it in their voice? These guys, these Chaldeans, these wise men, they're on it. They're quick to point out who is disobeying. Out of thousands and thousands of people gathered around out here, okay? They're quick to point out. Now, what do we see packed in this little verse here? Look at verse 12 closely with me. First thing we see here, he says there are certain Jews. He doesn't say what? All the Jews. Now, we know that there's others that have come, okay? And at this point, we believe this is after the second and the third deportation. So we don't really know how many Jews are out there. But when you try to look at it all, the commentaries and look at what people think, the timelines, it appears that there's probably many Jews that are out there at this point, not just the young men. But he says certain Jews. And then he quickly says, it ain't all of them, but it's the ones you appointed. It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, king. It's those three. Now, this gives testimony that these three did, in fact, for all ages, for us today to see, yep, not from a Christian or not from a believer, but from an unbeliever, they didn't bow. These young men did not bow to that image. And they're also quick to point out to the king that these Jews are the ones that you, king, put in charge over everybody. We ain't forgot that, king. You just booted us and brought them in. They're letting him know that. They've just been waiting for them to lose this power that they have so that they can get it back. Isn't that the nature of man, right? Have y'all ever dealt with that, maybe in the workplace or somewhere where, you know, someone got promoted over you or someone got something that, you know, or maybe it wasn't at work, maybe it's at school. Maybe a kid got to start on the ball team over you or got a cheerleading spot or whatever it is, and they got it and you didn't. What's your first? Do you get jealous? You get angry over it? That's our nature, isn't it? You know, and we have to fight against that nature. Well, these guys have been carrying that. They've been carrying. But I want you to make, as I said earlier, make no mistake about it, these Chaldeans have contempt and jealousy for these three Jews, and they were watching them. And they quickly saw that they would not bow down, which taught me something else. And I hadn't thought about this at all through this whole time, but I thought about this week. This book, by where you asked last week, where's Daniel? Why is it just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Where's Daniel? And I told you, we don't know. It's speculation that he's back at the king's palace. We don't know that for sure. We don't know if he's out there talking with Jeremiah. I don't know where he's at. The Bible doesn't tell us. But you know what I thought about that? It's a reminder to us today that this book is not about Daniel. Who's this book about? It's about the God of Daniel, right? And that's very important. Maybe God did that for a reason, so that we don't think of Daniel as this. It's like with David. We don't just put we don't make Daniel the hero. We don't make man the hero. That we're always glorifying God. That's all that Daniel would want us to do. It also lets me see here, and that these three other young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it shows me what they will do without their leader. Daniel's not there, but these three men chose to disobey this king, knowing he's already threatened to put them in the fire, and nobody's there to make them do it. Like I said, they don't have their parents there. They don't have Daniel there. They have their own convictions. And then I look back at these Chaldeans. Kylie, you know what I thought of? Tattletale, tattletale. Hang your britches on a nail. You ever heard that? You never heard that one? Hang your britches on a nail? I know your daddy's heard it. You ain't never heard that one? Well, that's what these Chaldeans are. They couldn't wait to go tattletale. O king, those three young men you made over to the leaders over Babylon, they won't bow down to your image. Remember what you said. You said you'd throw them in the fiery furnace. That's what he said back in verse 11. You're going to burn them. So Daniel's not there. Their parents aren't there. In fact, the thousands of other pagans out there bowing down, you think they care? They don't care about anything. Look. Think of it this way. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have got together and said, you know what, guys, look, I don't really want to be burned to death. These people don't care. All we got to do is go out there, bow down right quick, and then go on back to our business. It's no big deal. We're set up. He set us up over the whole province of Babylon. I mean, they got the best foods and everything you could ever imagine. All we got to do is just bow down. And I got to thinking about that today. I remember the story of the girl that got killed at Columbine. Do y'all remember hearing that story? Her parents were about to put her into state's custody because she was unruly. They couldn't control her. They didn't know what to do. And the father was talking to a man that he knew, and he said, hey, my daughter's going to this church camp. Why don't you make her go to this church camp, and maybe that'll help. He goes, man, I'm willing to try anything. And he sends his daughter off to this church camp, makes friends with this man's daughter, and next thing you know, she's born again at church camp. Comes home telling mom and daddy how sorry I am for the girl that I've been. I've been disrespectful. I've been rebellious, and all this stuff. And she's ready to live for Christ. And instantly, she's faced with someone, them boys at that school, making her denounce her faith in Christ. And she wouldn't do it, and they shot and killed her. Think about the kind of conviction. You could face this very soon in our future. They could come down here and say, Derek, we have banned conversion therapy. You cannot say the things that are in that Bible on social media. And I say, do whatever you got to do to me. Well, going to jail is one thing, but what if they say, hey, we're going to boil you alive. We're going to torture you. I've been reading Fox's Book of Martyrs. I've started reading that, right? And I want you guys to know some things, what they've done to Christians in the past. This is one example, throwing them in a fire. You're going to see later they throw them into a pit with lions. You know what Nero did? Nero took Christians and he wrapped them in animal skins, sewed up the animal skins, and then turned wild dogs loose on them. What do you think wild dogs do to an animal skin? They tear it to pieces. When they're tearing it to pieces, guess what they do to the human inside of it? He also took wax and he painted wax all over them and tied them up to trees in his courtyard and set them afire. Can you imagine walking along the street and you look over in somebody's yard and there's humans burning? They burned them at the stake. They boiled John in hot oil. They threw people off of buildings. They beat poor Timothy to death. It took him 2 days to die. I mean, I'm going on with the stories we read about Christians who have said, you know what? I'm not just going to bow down to this because God told me not to worship or not to bow down to any other image, not to have any other idols. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood their ground. They stood their ground. You live this life ignoring God in order to protect For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And there's been many men and women that could testify today, I've made that decision. I'm turning from this world and I'm following Christ. I don't care what it costs me. Let me ask you tonight, what would make you turn away from God? What threat? What exciting thing? What could Satan offer that would make you turn away from God? What fears would make you turn away from God? And we have to process that in our mind. Let me wrap this up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, look at verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you did not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? We've seen this reaction from him before, right? When they couldn't interpret the dream, rage and anger. He quickly gets this kind of mad. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's like. Now, I got to thinking when I read this, wonder why Nebuchadnezzar didn't just order them to be killed like he did the last time. Remember, he sent his guard, go get the ones who can't interpret the dream, go kill them. Why didn't he just tell them instantly? But he brought them before him. You know why? If you do not worship, and I like how you put that word in there, worship. He didn't say, I don't want you just to bow down. I want your whole allegiance. I want your whole commitment. I want everything about you to follow me. See, that's what he wants. See, when we worship God, we don't worship him, what's the word I'm looking for? Flippantly, haphazardly. When we come in, that's why we come together on the Lord's Day, right? Do you come in here with a mind, hey, you know what, God, you saved my soul. You died on the cross for me. You've forgiven me of my sins. You've blessed me. I mean, we start counting our blessings, all the things. Even when we have tragedy in our life, even when we have fears in our life, we always know that God is taking care of us, don't we? So we come into this place and we're ready to worship. Right? And that's why he uses that word. But I want you to worship me. What does Satan want? What did Satan ask Jesus to do? Fall down and what? Worship him. That's what he wanted. That's what he wanted. They just gave up. I mean, they're fixing to be burned and we're going to see next week, they heated up 7 times. What would you do? All you got to do is just, okay, King, I give, and then you can go home. You can go home and be safe.